After saving a lion cub, a man is surrounded by the pride, and what they do is shocking. The muddy waters of the Mara River rushed around David Thompson's chest as he fought against the current, the drowning lion cub clinging desperately to his shoulders. Just minutes earlier, the 34-year-old wildlife photographer had been setting up his equipment on the riverbank when he witnessed something that would change his life forever. A tiny cub tumbling into the swollen river, swept away by floodwaters that had risen overnight from heavy rains upstream. David had been documenting wildlife in Kenya's Masai Mara for 8 years, but he had never broken the cardinal rule of nature photography: never interfere with natural processes. Until now, the cub, no more than 4 months old, had been playing too close to the water's edge when the soft earth crumbled beneath his paws. His terrified squeals as he was dragged downstream by the powerful current pierced through David's professional detachment. Without hesitation, David dropped his camera and plunged into the dangerous river. "I couldn't just watch him drown," David later told investigators. "Every instinct I had as a human being overrode my training as a wildlife photographer." The rescue nearly cost David his life. The Mara River during flood season is treacherous, filled with hidden debris and unpredictable currents that have claimed the lives of countless animals and several humans over the years. As David fought to reach the struggling cub, a submerged log struck his left shoulder, nearly knocking him unconscious. Only his determination to save the young lion kept him focused as he finally managed to grab the exhausted animal. The cub, weak from swallowing river water and panicked from the trauma, immediately wrapped his small paws around David's neck and held on with surprising strength. David could feel the animal's tiny heart beating rapidly against his chest as he began the dangerous journey back to shore, fighting against a current that seemed determined to drag them both downstream toward the crocodile-infested pools below. What David didn't realize as he struggled through the muddy water was that he was being watched. On the riverbank, hidden among the acacia trees, 5 adult lionesses had been tracking the sound of their missing cub's distress calls. The pride had been searching frantically for the youngster, following his scent trail to the river's edge, just in time to witness David's rescue attempt. As David finally reached the shallower water near the bank, exhausted and gasping for breath, he looked up to see a sight that made his blood freeze. The entire pride was there. Not just the 5 lionesses, but also a massive male lion with a dark mane, all standing motionless in a semicircle around the water's edge. Their amber eyes were fixed on him and the cub he carried. David's mind raced through his options, but he quickly realized he had none. He was trapped in chest-deep water, holding a lion cub with 6 full-grown lions blocking his path to safety. Any sudden movement could trigger an attack that would end his life in seconds. The largest lioness, clearly the pride's matriarch, took a step closer to the water. David held his breath, expecting the worst. Lions are fiercely protective of their young, and here he was, a human stranger holding one of their cubs. Everything he knew about lion behavior told him this situation would end in tragedy. But something extraordinary was about to happen, something that would challenge everything scientists understood about lion cognition and social behavior. The matriarch's eyes weren't filled with aggression or threat. Instead, David detected something he had never seen in a wild predator's gaze during 8 years of wildlife photography: recognition and what appeared to be gratitude. The cub in David's arms began mewing softly, calling to his pride. The sound seemed to break the tense standoff, and what followed would be captured on David's waterproof action camera, which had been recording automatically throughout the entire incident. The matriarch stepped into the shallow water, her massive paws creating ripples as she moved closer to David. Every muscle in his body tensed, preparing for an attack that never came. Instead, the lioness stopped just 3 feet away and did something that defied every law of predator behavior David had studied. She lowered her head in what could only be described as a bow. The gesture lasted several seconds, during which the other pride members remained completely still, as if witnessing a ceremony of profound significance. When the matriarch raised her head, she made direct eye contact with David, not the threatening stare of a predator assessing prey, but the steady gaze of acknowledgement between equals. The cub in David's arms grew more active, reaching toward his mother with tiny paws while making soft, chirping sounds. The matriarch responded with gentle, chuffing vocalizations, the same sounds lionesses use to communicate with their cubs during nursing and grooming. "It's okay, little one," David whispered to the cub, his voice barely audible above the sound of the rushing water. Your family is here." As if responding to his words, the matriarch took another step closer. David's heart hammered against his ribs, but something in the lioness's demeanor told him he wasn't in danger. Her approach was careful, deliberate, and completely non-threatening. What happened next would be analyzed by animal behaviorists around the world for years to come. The matriarch gently extended her massive head toward David close enough that he could feel her warm breath on his face. For several moments, she simply studied him, her intelligent amber eyes seeming to assess not just his physical presence, but something deeper, his intentions, his character, his role in saving her cub. Then she did something unprecedented in recorded lion behavior. The matriarch began to groom David. Her rough tongue made contact with his forehead, the same nurturing behavior she would show to members of her own pride. The gesture was unmistakable. She was accepting him temporarily as part of her family unit. David remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, as this apex predator showed him a level of trust that contradicted everything he thought he knew about wild animals. The grooming lasted only 30 seconds, but the message was clear to every member of the pride. David was not a threat. He was not prey. He was the human who had risked his life to save one of their own. The other lionesses began to move closer, their body language relaxed rather than aggressive. The massive male lion, who had been maintaining a watchful distance, padded to the water's edge and lowered himself into a resting position. A clear signal that he considered the situation peaceful, David carefully began moving toward the shore, still carrying the cub. The pride parted to create a clear path for him, their behavior more reminiscent of an honor guard than predators surrounding prey. As he reached the muddy bank, David slowly knelt and placed the cub on solid ground. The reunion was immediate and emotional. The matriarch rushed to her offspring, nuzzling him thoroughly, checking for injuries, and purring with relief. The other lionesses gathered around, each taking turns to sniff and examine the rescued cub. The male lion approached last, his massive head lowering to gently touch the youngster with his nose. David remained kneeling on the riverbank, water dripping from his clothes, watching this intimate family moment unfold. He should have been terrified, surrounded by 6 of Africa's most dangerous predators. Instead, he felt honored to witness something few humans had ever seen: the genuine emotional bonds within a lion pride. Dr. Sarah Mbeki, a wildlife biologist who later reviewed David's footage, was stunned by what she observed. The grooming behavior exhibited by the matriarch is typically reserved for pride members, she explained. For a wild lioness to extend this gesture to a human suggests a level of cognitive recognition and gratitude that challenges our fundamental understanding of feline social intelligence. As the pride settled around their recovered cub, David began to slowly back away, hoping to give them space and avoid disrupting this precious family moment. But the lions had other plans. As David began to retreat, the matriarch looked up from her cub and made a sound he had never heard before in 8 years of documenting African wildlife. It wasn't a roar or a growl, but a gentle rumbling call that seemed almost conversational. The other pride members immediately responded, rising to their feet and positioning themselves in a formation that took David's breath away. The lions arranged themselves in 2 parallel lines, creating a clear pathway from where David stood to the acacia tree where his photography equipment waited. It was an escort formation, an honor guard protecting his safe passage away from the river. "Impossible," David whispered, his voice caught by the waterproof microphone still recording every moment. They're seeing me safely out." The matriarch took the lead position on David's right side, while the massive male lion moved to his left. The 4 other lionesses flanked them, maintaining perfect spacing as they began a slow ceremonial walk away from the riverbank. David found himself in the center of this extraordinary procession, surrounded by over 1,500 of apex predators who were treating him like an honored guest rather than potential prey. The rescued cub, now recovered enough to walk, trotted alongside his mother, occasionally looking up at David with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. Every few steps, the youngster would brush against David's leg, a gesture of familiarity that left David speechless. As they reached David's equipment, the Pride came to a halt. The matriarch approached David one final time, her massive head tilting slightly as she studied his face. Then, in a gesture that would be replayed millions of times on social media, she gently pressed her forehead against his. The same greeting behavior lions use with trusted Pride members. "Thank you," David whispered, not caring if the lions could understand his words. "Thank you for trusting me." The matriarch stepped back and released a soft chuff, a sound of contentment and farewell. One by one, each member of the Pride approached David, briefly touching him with their noses or rubbing against his legs. Even the massive male lion participated, gently bumping David's shoulder with his enormous head before moving away. The rescued cub was the last to say goodbye. The youngster sat directly in front of David, tilted his tiny head upward, and released a small mew that sounded remarkably like a thank you. David reached down and gently stroked the cub's head one final time, both of them seeming to understand that this moment would never be repeated. As the Pride began to move away, heading toward the shade of distant trees for their afternoon rest, David stood alone by his equipment, soaking wet and emotionally overwhelmed by what had just transpired. His action camera had captured every second of the unprecedented encounter. The footage would later be authenticated by wildlife experts, analyzed by animal behaviorists, and featured in documentaries around the world. Dr. Jane Goodall herself would call it one of the most remarkable displays of interspecies communication and gratitude ever recorded. But for David, the technical analysis mattered less than the profound truth he had experienced firsthand. In that muddy river, surrounded by wild lions who should have seen him as a threat, he had witnessed something that science was only beginning to understand: the capacity for genuine gratitude and recognition across species barriers. The rescued cub grew to full adulthood under the protection of his Pride, and David continued his photography work in the Masai Mara. On several occasions over the following months, he encountered the same Pride during his shoots. Each time, the matriarch would acknowledge him with a gentle chuff, and the now-grown lion he had saved would approach his vehicle without fear, sometimes resting in the shade it provided. Local Messiah guides began calling David Simba's brother, the man who had been adopted, however, briefly, into a lion pride. Tourism operators started offering David Thompson tours, hoping to recreate the magic of his encounter, though none ever came close to replicating the extraordinary trust and gratitude he had experienced. Dr. Becky established the Thompson Mara Research Foundation to study the cognitive and emotional capabilities demonstrated by the Pride during the rescue. David's experience proves that the boundaries between human and animal consciousness are far more fluid than we ever imagined. She wrote in her groundbreaking paper, "Now, what we witnessed wasn't just animal behavior. It was a demonstration of values we consider uniquely human: gratitude, honor, and the recognition of moral debt." For David Thompson, who had started that day simply hoping to photograph wildlife, the encounter became a life-changing reminder that compassion is a universal language spoken and understood by creatures we're only beginning to truly know.